Welcome to the Here's Waldo podcast, where we sit down with top visionaries and creatives in the video game industry. Together, we'll unravel their journeys and learn more about the path they're forging ahead. Now, let's get started with the show.
Hi, I'm Lizzie Mintis, founder and CEO of Here's Waldo Recruiting, a boutique video game recruitment firm. This is the Here's Waldo podcast. In every episode, we dive deep into conversations with creatives, founders, and executives about what it takes to make a successful video game. You can expect to hear valuable lessons from their journey and get a glimpse into the future of the industry. This episode is brought to you by Here's Waldo Recruiting, a boutique recruitment firm for the video game industry. We value quality over quantity, transparency, communication, and diversity. We partner with companies, creatives, and programmers to understand the why behind their needs. We provide a white glove experience that ensures a win-win outcome. Before introducing today's guest, I want to give a big thank you to Tim Cullings for introducing us. Tim is the executive director of the Global Game Jam and Seattle Indies. Check out more at globalgamejam.org. Today, we have Eve Crevoshay with us. Eve joined Take This as executive director in 2018. She is a 20-year veteran of the nonprofit sector, and her background spans education, social services, and the arts. Eve is a member of the advisory board for GDC and the Fair Play Alliance, and is the recipient of the inaugural GamesBeat Up and Comer Award for 2020 and the 2022 Games for a Change Festival Vanguard Award. Let's get started. Thanks for joining me here today. Glad Tim could connect us. First of all, can you tell us a little bit more about Take This in general, the organization, and your part in?
Sure thing. Yeah, I'm really glad to be here. And I am likewise very glad that Tim was able to connect us. Take This is a mental health research, advocacy, and training nonprofit organization that serves the game industry and the game community. We address all of the issues that contribute to or detract from mental well-being in games, in and around games, and look a lot at the root causes and structural issues that challenge mental well-being, as well as being an advocate for therapy, mental health, and accurate information about mental health challenges and mental illness. We've been around for 10 years. As I said, as you introduced me, I've been here for half of that time. And in that time, we've really grown from doing a really wonderful program, which we still do, and we'll be doing very soon at PAX West, which is called the AFK Room program. And that is a quiet, supportive space at game conventions designed to help people kind of rest and recoup and find their calm amongst the really intense experience of a game convention. And that's a really important program for us in terms of providing actual relief to folks who are experiencing a challenging and intense experience, but also allowing us to start a conversation about mental health, because it's an opening of like, hey, yeah, everybody has this experience and it's time, and there's ways to address it. And we call it the most boring place on the convention floor on purpose. So it's a low stimulation place. And we've gone from that to really trying to work across the industry. We work with streamers. We have a streaming ambassador program. We have a bunch of resources for streamers and content creators around burnout prevention and managing suicidal ideation on stream, managing parasocial relationships, a lot of that stuff. We do workshops and training and consulting inside the industry on everything from studio culture and like management styles and tools, and like conflict resolution, talking about bad news, psychological safety, burnout prevention, etc., to actual consultation on games, game mechanics, and game content around mental health and mental health portrayal. And mechanics that may be problematic for people who experience mental health challenges. And then we do just a ton of advocacy around mental health literacy and around some of the underlying issues. And then we do a bunch of research. And right now our research is focused on extremist behavior in games, so extremist behavior in online spaces. And the reason we're looking at that stuff, which doesn't immediately sound like it's related to mental health, is because the entire time we've been doing this work, people, when they talk about the challenges they experience, both people who make games and people who play games, they talk about toxicity, harassment, and online behavior as being one of the most challenging parts of being part of this game community. And we take that really seriously. And we know that there's a lot of elements to that. And one of the elements to that is understanding how it plays out and what it means, and being able to reflect that back to the game making community so that they have the tools that they need to really design better tools, better games, and better community environments to inoculate against that kind of behavior and to shift the norms and behaviors of the community in a more positive direction. And that's what's really exciting. And then to also think about what are the best practices that we can identify and raise up across the industry. So that's what we do. We have our hands in a lot of different pots. We are actually a pretty small organization, and with about like 7 folks on our staff, with a few other consultants who drop in as needed, and so we try to do a lot with a very small and efficient team, but it's a really cool team, and it's a really exciting kind area of work, and we're really pleased to be here.
So it sounds like, I didn't realize you help streamers, you help people that play games, and people make games. So kind of the entire ecosystem.
Yeah, we try. Yeah, because the whole entire ecosystem is really interconnected. And so we see, that the culture of a studio and the people that feel welcome in it impact the content and quality and design and approach of a game, which impacts the experience of playing and the experience of streaming. And the culture is really of a piece, and the ways that people interact and the norms and whether is acceptable are shaped at every level of that interaction. And so, it's really important for us to be able to identify and speak to levers in all parts of that.
Makes sense how it's interconnected, but you wouldn't always think that my studio culture is going to impact how the game is made, which is going to impact how so many people end up feeling who are playing the game.
Big time.
What do you see as the industry trends right now, since it all correlates in games, and how does that implications are there around mental health and society even, really?
Yeah. There's a lot. I mean, the game, when we talk about trends in games, we're talking about a huge industry, which is really quite diverse. And so there's a lot of different ways to answer that. But I will say that one of the things that we're really experiencing and seeing from our perspective is a really burgeoning and exciting and heartening recognition that trust and safety, community management, community design, and player interaction are really central to the experience of playing games, especially as they are really now social online experiences, multiplayer. And so there's a real strong movement in games to take that seriously and to build out the tech and the design expertise and the kind of human knowledge base that's needed to bring all resources to bear. So we see trust and safety AI, we see all kinds of cool community management, community design conversations. We see game design conversations happening, and that's really heartening. We have seen at a macro level a lot of consolidation in the industry over the last few years, right? Really massive wave of acquisition and rolling up, and that is that's a tough environment for a lot of environments, because it means that publishing is happening inside companies as opposed to studios, indie studios really having the space to access publishing opportunities. And the funding environment has gotten tighter, and that means and I always say that indie studios and indie design is where so much innovation and excitement and some of the the beauty of the industry comes out first, and so it's a tougher time for that right now. but those are cyclical trends, and I think we'll see another round of opening up over time. The industry continues to grow. It's not going anywhere. So I have a lot of hope for that over time. And then the really big trend is, oh my gosh, what are we going to do about AI, and how does that impact everything? And I see, as you said in your introduction, I sit on the GDC advisory board, and we're really keen to see that AI conversation really develop at 2024 at the conference in 2024, and I think we're gonna be able to have that conversation in a lot of different ways. It's an important one. There's the technical affordances and considerations. There's the human capital and labor conversation. Like, what does this mean for people who do things and make things in games, and how do we really respect the human capital element of this, the people involved? And then there's also a set of questions around IP and who owns this and who has the rights to make money off of it, et cetera. And obviously, as a mental health organization, our concern is always, what is the human impact of this, and how do we take care of people and recognize that people make and play games, but also recognize that there's complex problems. Games are really big and complex and hard to wrangle. And so what are the ways in which AI can really be additive to that experience in interesting ways? Especially, and I see this especially in trust and safety and moderation, content moderation. Yeah. So those are the big ones.
It'll be really interesting to see what happens with AI, but you're right. It's making a lot of people uneasy that it will replace certain aspects.
Oh yeah. And like, that's not unique to games at all.
Right.
It's happening across, there's a fever pitch to a conversation about AI, across society. It's a major inflection point. I think about my husband. I have a 12-year-old, and my husband's been trying to get her to play with AI with ChatGPT, because he's like, listen, the internet was our generation's. I'm 45, so the internet was our generation's like inflection point, and it really transformed. Like, it's wild how different the world is, and how much it took us on this wild ride over the last 20 something, 20, 30 years. I guess it's been about 25, 28 years for me, in my consciousness. And AI is my daughter's generation's internet. We don't even know what it's gonna be,
It's interesting. So she's not using it to write her essays or anything like that?
She's using it, she's a writer, and she's using it actually she did a little bit to brainstorm ideas, and she uses it as a research and kind of question and answer tool. Yeah, it's wild.
In a lot of different ways. And we'll see what happens with the strike and all. So
yeah, the strikes are going to be monumental and kind of impacting where this goes. Yeah.
Well, I wanted to bring up the recent monumental Bungie lawsuit, where they won a lawsuit against people that were harassing employees. Yes. Do you feel like that? I feel like that's going to change the industry a lot. Just wanted to get your thoughts on how companies can follow in Bungie's footsteps, and what kind of situations, because it's not a unique situation, but it's a unique resolution to the situation.
It is. Yeah. In fact, I did a talk about this at GDC last year, about how, so this culture I've been talking about that, that creates a space where harassment is possible and normalized, is a culture that included for a long time this idea, and I think a fear on the part of most game companies, that the player is always right, and the player and this, like, the tyranny of the player, right? And this and we've seen that recently within the last 3 years. There's been a couple of high profile things that happened, like there was some firings at ArenaNet a few years ago. Jessica Price was because she talked back to a player, basically. She was fired, and so was her colleague, and that happened not that long ago. And what happened at Bungie is really profoundly different. And I think it's evidence of this dawning realization that like there's a line that can't be crossed.
Yeah.
And that it's okay to tell players that they're doing something wrong and inappropriate. And one of the things, so we just did, we got some data through a partnership with Nielsen, the survey, the consumer survey organization, and they provided us with some survey data from players who said, that they make choices about where they spend money based often on how toxic that game is. So, and younger players in particular are more likely to not spend money on a game or not engage at all in a game if it is more toxic.
Okay.
And so, which is the first time we've had real good data that says, no, players are walking away from games because they're toxic. It's really powerful data. This just came out like last month. It's new. It's a new piece of research, and that gives us that is fuel to the fire of what Bungie is saying, which is, hey, like, in fact, if we clean up our games, we actually have a larger potential audience here. And so it's in our interest to do that. And one thing that I think that spurred Bungie to be able to do that is because, they took a step back a few years ago. This is maybe 4 years ago now. It was pre-pandemic. And they said, hey, we keep saying that we're making games that we love, but our audience is not just the people in the studio. Our audience is more diverse.
Yes.
So we need to recognize that we are making games for our audience to love. Who is that actually? And how do we respect those players and the full diversity of those players? And that's a really powerful and accurate statement. And it's really encouraging that Bungie did that. And I think that's where it led them down that road of, okay, we need to then protect and welcome all of our players. And I see that trend, not just at Bungie, but they're a really powerful example. And this is a great opportunity to like welcome other people into games and think critically about how we design. Now, that said, one of the challenges that we're faced with right now, and something that our research has shown, is that this kind of laissez-faire, and also this tyranny of the player, this laissez-faire attitude to moderation, and has normalized a culture of hate, harassment, and toxicity in games and extremism. And that players have learned that, and they've taught each other that, and that's a hardship to turn around. It doesn't just turn on a dime magically. And so there's a lot of work to be done to shift player expectations, to shift player behavior, to shift norms, and to re-educate everyone about what's okay and what's not.
Yeah.
And so there's no magic bullet. There's a lot of tools that need to be brought to the table to make that shift over time. Yeah.
So what do you think makes a game so toxic? Do you think that games where you shoot people are games that end up being more toxic? Or do you think that it's something about the player mechanics, something about the community? What makes a toxic game? Or in the inverse, how can you ensure that your game that you're making is not toxic?
So that's part of the challenge, is that it's a complicated answer. We do know from a couple of decades of research that violent games do not cause violence in players. That research is, in fact, settled. However, there are certain types of game content and types of game tropes that foster certain perspectives and certain facilitate certain ideologies. A talk some of my colleagues gave last year at JDC. They were talking about this research that we've been doing about the co-optation of certain game assets and game tropes by extremists, right? And there's and you know, like, and there's a variety, there's a wide range of that, of how that's done and what that looks like. I don't want to call out specific games here, but there's been a lot of examples of game assets and ideologies being co-opted, and you know, there's like, I will call this out. So a few years ago, there was I forget which game off the top of my head, but it was a Ubisoft game, and it had some really racist tropes in it around, I think, and politicized tropes. And the designer was like, no, we don't, our games aren't political. They are, in fact, political. Like, games and the choices you make about how who's portrayed as good or bad, and where things are set and what kind of scenarios, those are political choices, and we have to be aware of those and responsible for those as game designers. That said, primarily, what we've seen is that even in first-person shooters, even in violent games, if the community is monitored and designed and moderated in a way that encourages friendly competition and fun, but not bad behavior and harassing behavior, then you get a better community. And you can do that in a variety of contexts. The challenge is that we've gotten so used to not doing that, and so used to just being like, well, the players are toxic, that it's really hard. And I will say that for a long time, we've had voice chat in games, and we haven't had, for example, real-time voice moderation or real-time text moderation. And we're getting to the point where those tools exist and that technology is functional. And so it did take some time for the tech to catch up to the problem, because we can't do all of this, you know. And so it's so, as you can see, like, there's lots of different elements to this in terms of games are politicized, they're complex, systems and economies in games have an impact on the way that players relate to each other, whether it's more or less antagonistic. There's all kinds of tools and ways of thinking about this. The Fair Play Alliance has been doing some really interesting work around a playbook for digital thriving. They're working on it right now, and that's really exciting because that's thinking about the design element. But then there's also this, you know, just pure moderation tech question that we're starting to be able to answer. Yeah,
and it's like AI could be potentially very helpful.
Super helpful in that way.
Yeah.
Yeah, 100%.
Will the Fair Play Alliance playbook be distributed to anybody that desires it?
Yeah, it's still in development. They presented some of the concepts at GDC last year. I think it's slated for release in 2024 sometime. I'm you know, talk to them, not me, about the specifics, but I've seen some of a lot of the early work, and I'm very excited about it. And there are other resources. The Polaris Game Design Retreat is also doing some of this work. And so there's like the all of this stuff is designed to be open source and freely available to the community.
I love. Okay, so that's if you're a studio that's looking to improve your game, your the experience and everything. What if you work for a company and you're having mental health issues, or somebody in your company that you're close to is having a mental health issue? What resources do you recommend that people?
So at takethis.org, we have a very easy to find mental health resources page, and it includes some basic resources like emotional support hotlines, crisis hotlines, etc., worldwide. And also information about how to find a therapist, what it means to get therapy, how to advocate for yourself in therapy. We also have some places with advice on how to support others who may be experiencing mental health crises. But what I will say is that from everything we know about mental health and mental well-being and mental illness, the most important protective factor, the most important contributor to resilience and well-being is your ability to find and be in supportive community with others.
Yeah.
Find your people that one of the things about games is that we have online community, and we have really fantastic online community, and you can often find your people that way, and that functions similarly, not exactly the same as, but in similar ways to in-person community. But finding people and getting support and identifying where that comes from is really important. And then the basics of self-care. The boring basics of getting enough sleep, eating well, exercising, or moving your body, getting fresh air, unless you live in Seattle right now and it's smoky, but that's another story. All of those things are important. Doing things that are fun, engaging in play. Play is really important for all of us, whether it's, whether we're 2 or we're 100.
The same rules apply.
Same rules apply.
Kids and adults, games and not games.
Yep.
So translated across.
Yeah. So that's that's my counseling. Now, for people who are in the industry, I have some very specific advice, and this is because we, as an industry, we come to games often with a lot of passion. And that's wonderful and beautiful, but passion can be weaponized, both by ourselves, on ourselves, and by others towards us. And we often think about passion in terms of how much we work, and that reflecting a dedication. And in fact, that's not healthy, it's not sustainable, and it's not appropriate, because at some point, passion becomes an excuse for others to extract too much work from you. You're not getting compensated for it, and your health is going to suffer, and your success as an employee is going to suffer. Our brains do not function well past a certain number of hours of work a week, 35 to 40. After that, our performance declines. There's a lot of evidence to support that, and you're not the exception. And it's hard to recognize when your performance starts to decline at that point, because you're already starting to get overtired, and your mental acuity is going down. And so, and there are long-term stress effects on your body and your mind from overwork. So passion does not give you permission or an excuse to work too much, ever. And no job that requires or expects that kind of commitment in the name of passion or anything else over the long term. I recognize that crunch and short-term situations happen sometimes, and events happen, et cetera, but long-term cultural crunch that will harm your health over the long term, and no job is worth that.
Yeah. From a hiring perspective, it's funny. I was having this conversation today, talking to somebody who's making 140 and wants a job for $20,000 more. And that's probably over the threshold of being comfortable to live. But the factor in consideration that I was trying to highlight was how much more you might be working for this amount of money. And does that really translate into for you?
And the truth is that probably it doesn't.
Probably not. I was going to say flat out that it doesn't.
It doesn't. Well, okay, it doesn't. Yeah. I mean, here's the thing. There are certain problems that money solves.
Yeah.
And we have to be clear-eyed about that. At some point, that you've gone past that threshold, for sure. And what sounds like a good idea when you're 25 and maybe single or don't have kids is not going to feel the same later on in your life. When you're older and you have a family, if you decide to have a family, all of those things are going to change drastically. And the choices and habits you built at 25 or 22 or even 27 are not necessarily choices and habits that are going to sustain you long term.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's an adjustment. And for me, it's always important to understand where somebody is in that spectrum.
Yeah.
Because if you just graduated and you live by yourself with your cat and you love to make games and you want to go all in, it's a very different.
It is. But still, I want to caution, the idea, you're still it's still not a good idea. If you live by yourself with your cat and you're 22 and you've just graduated, you're still not going to give good performance at hour 45 or hour 60. And you still need to not do that. If you want to work on a side project, if you want to step away, but you need to have things that take you away from the work that you do for pay, or you're not going to be okay long term.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I would agree. I had another friend that I'm kind of helping him get a job on the side. He'll probably listen to this later, but he was sending me messages from a recruiter, but it was a questionable recruiter if they were real or if they weren't real. And there's so many issues with finding a job and knowing if it's a scam or not, or just having a hard time through the interview process. Right now, a lot of people are laid off. And from my perspective, a job search is a time of stress for most people, and maybe something most people aren't fully aware of how to best utilize, like how to get referrals and talk to other people and get a job. A lot of people apply and apply and apply and get rejections, and that's really hard too. Do you do any work around job seeking or interviewing?
No, we usually refer people out to other organizations and recruiters who are doing this work on a regular basis, because we have in the past provided spaces for groups of people who've been laid off all at once to process, and and kind of we run listening sessions sometimes in spaces for processing, because that is an element of this. But the job market and that job search process is really hard. It can be really intimidating, and I will say that there are lots of resources. Like, I would say that at some point the financial considerations are the most important ones, but initially what you want is to remember what you're good at and remember that you have value in this process. Everybody does, and bring that to the table and stick up for yourself.
People just how to best present themselves.
And there's I mean, you're a recruiter, there's lots of recruiters and placement agencies, and there's these amazing job boards that are like hosted as kind of volunteer efforts, and there's a bunch of those, and there's things like the game industry gathering, and other gathering spaces online that are designed to help people network and find each other across the industry, and those are really wonderful places to start.
Advice. Can you tell me about kind of the highlight success story of Take This, or where you think the organization has had the most dramatic impact since you've started? I know you touch so many different.
We do. I mean, I think that excuse me. I think that our ability to combine a conversation about studio culture and mental well-being, and make a case that the two are entwined and that they impact retention and success and sustainability, has really helped to shift conversation in the industry. And we've been doing that. In 2018, we published a white paper on the state of mental health in games, and we've been kind of building on that since, with research, with workshops, with tools, and I think that it's we're primarily an advocacy organization. Our ability to shift the conversation and shift kind of the starting point for what the norms are, that's really what's exciting. I think, it was really an affirmation and a lot of recognition when we were funded by the Department of Homeland Security to do this research on extremism, because it was like, oh yeah, we're a legitimate space here. We got funding alongside Middlebury Institute. That was pretty cool. But that's very much not the only thing we do. We've had the opportunity to give workshops at DICE. We've had the opportunity to give talks at GDC, and those are really important spaces where I feel like our impact is really being felt.
Yeah, I love that you have a quiet space during conferences.
Mm-hmm.
Game recruiting agency, my job is talking to people, and I even feel overwhelmed at these conferences. It's so many people. So I can
It's a
only
lot.
imagine if you were an introvert, how you would be doing.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, I have to like go hibernate at night sometimes at GDC because I'm like, I can't take it anymore. I can't do it. Yeah.
I met up with a woman who's wonderful, and she told me, this is my social adventure for the year. Let's
Yeah.
do this. I'm going to go home for the rest of the year.
Yeah. Yeah, we have a policy after events. Because our staff doesn't get the AFK room because we run it. And I think this is good policy in general. We have a policy that you take off time immediately after a major event that you've been at. So people get 2 to 4 days, depending on the length of the conference, off. Sometimes we take it immediately after, sometimes we take it like a week later, but we are just like, like overwork, like conferences are major outlays of energy, even for extroverts. We need that time to restore ourselves before we can really jump back in effectively. Yeah.
I would agree. And again, I think I'm on the extreme side. Are there companies that you feel like, we talked about Bungie, but are really setting a great example for studio culture and inclusivity and just positive mental health for their employees?
I mean, yeah, what I'll say is that, we've worked with some really cool studios like Iron Galaxy and Hyper Hippo that are really taking employee wellness really, seriously. Like Iron Galaxy, they do a lot of co-development. And so they bake into their contracts the working hours of their employees, the boundaries around, right? And that stuff is kind of brilliant because the devil's in the details around sustainability and culture. And there are some really interesting models of small studios that are doing like cooperative development, like cooperatively owned studios that are taking employee ownership and benefit to a new level. There are big studios that are really trying to wrestle through all kinds of DEI issues. And I've talked to folks at Ubisoft a lot. I've talked to folks at Riot a lot. We work with both companies, and they have really problematic histories, right? They've been through some major exposés, and what's interesting to see is the process, that messy process of them working towards something that's much more sustainable and positive, and the real work that goes into that, the real work of developing spaces where employees can come together, opening up conversations, et cetera, and shifting culture slowly over time. And those are unfinished projects, but they are projects that are ongoing and in the right direction. So it's hard to the thing about work environments and studios doing the right thing is that this process is never finished.
I was going to say that.
Yeah, it's like it is an iterative process, just like games. The iteration of good culture is the doing of good culture. It's literally in the policies, the practices, the interactions, the calling in, the vulnerability and transparency of leadership. And that is always an ongoing process. As a leader, I know this intimately. I know it, from my own perspective. I have to be vulnerable, transparent, and clear on an everyday basis, or the culture isn't sustained. And so it is the leaders that are doing that work themselves.
Yeah.
I've seen it at Naughty Dog. I've talked to folks in a variety of places. And it's the managers, the middle managers who are learning and growing and trying hard to support their employees without getting defensive or scared. And that's just work. That's work. It's work that happens personally. People have personal transformational work to do to get there. And it's work that's reinforced at an organizational and leadership level every day.
It's hard.
It is hard, but it's possible. It's totally possible.
everything good is a lot of hard work.
Exactly. Yeah.
So that's how it works. If
Yeah.
you're just starting, I mean, it's a huge undertaking, but if a company wants to begin, what are some common first steps? Is it just understanding the problem?
Like, as if they're just starting to try to think about their culture, or if they're just like,
maybe it's gotten to a bad place and they want to turn it around. What are some baby steps that you could take? I'm sure there are a million, and
there are 1,000,010, but
yeah.
So when we start working with studios that are trying to confront cultural challenges, the first thing we do is look at leadership and say, are you truly bought in? And do you have the tools that you need and to do this work? And then we start talking to people, because people need to talk. People need to share their experience. They need to express their pain or their hurt or their problems or their fears. And we need to understand what that is and how it works. And that level of sharing and transparency and the willingness of leadership to hear it is the absolute necessary first step. And once we've done that, then we can say, okay, then we're going to work on X, Y, and Z, because each studio is unique and each set of challenges is unique. And it might, both from a cultural perspective, where are they situated, from a legal perspective, from a structural, and because of the types of games they make and the types of projects and the size that they are. Like, there's so many unique factors, but that process of being ready to listen.
Yeah.
And creating space for the expression of that harm, which is usually harm, is the necessary first step. That's where you start. Yeah, and we facilitate that a lot.
So your company will come in and partner, and it's you, and you don't outsource it. It's your organization.
Yeah. So my team, I'm not a clinical psychologist because I do nonprofit work. That's my background. But my team is all clinicians, social workers, psychologists, therapists, and that expertise in facilitation and holding space is what is so profound that we can bring to the table. And we have people of a variety of identities and lived experiences, and that's also really important to bring to the table. So we often ensure that the people who are facilitating sessions share the identity of the people in the session, and that work is that's who does it, and they're really good at it. My team is kind of amazing.
I love that, and you've been there for 5 years, which these days says a lot.
It's a long time. I know. I have so much fun doing this work. I have to say that, like, when I was a little baby college graduate, like, I want to change the world, and I had no idea what that meant or how to do it. I had to figure that out, and I had I didn't know where I would end up, and I got a master's degree in communication studies, which is like cultural studies and rhetoric. And I was like, I don't know what I'm doing, right? And it took me a while to get to a place where I had the work experience and the pieces together. And I came to this job, and I was like, we'll see how this works, right? And all of a sudden I was like, wait, I can do transformative cultural work here in an industry. How random, but what an amazing opportunity. And I feel so privileged to be able to do this work.
I love that you love it, and that means you do work.
Yeah.
Mine. I help people find each other, and that's the best too. But it's a different.
That's equally as rewarding.
It is so rewarding. It's kind of like Chutes and Ladders. There's so many things that can go wrong, right? There's so many reasons that it goes sideways, but when it works and people are screaming with joy, like they're squealing to you on the phone, this is my dream job. That's the best.
But that is amazing. That's so cool.
There's a lot of wonkiness along the way.
Oh yeah. I mean, we have all kinds of wonkiness in our work too. And, conversations that people who are scared, and conversations that don't go right, and organizations that don't have the tools they need, and, and structural issues that just, push back. And, that is part of the work. It's hard work, but that's okay. Yeah.
That is okay. You just have to get onto the next. Yeah, for sure. How do you think the game industry, we talked about it evolving, but how can people stay ahead of the curve in terms of mental health? Because things are moving so fast.
So So I will answer this first on a personal level, and then I'll answer it at a structural level. So on a personal level, the way that you stay ahead of your own mental health is super boring and prosaic, and it literally is self-care and good boundaries. um, and there's a tool that I was introduced in my own therapy process that called self-compassion. And it comes from Buddhist philosophy, but it's been studied as a tool in psychology pretty substantially. And it's really cool. And self-compassion is this idea that we function better as human beings. Our brains do better when we are kind to them, when we are kind to ourselves, when we build ourselves up and not put ourselves down, and when we take time to build mindfulness or self-reflection and perspective taking basically into our lives, into our process. So building up keeping ourselves well, keeping ourselves healthy, and then also giving ourselves time for mindfulness and reflection so that we can recognize the signs in ourselves that contribute, where we might be not okay, where we might be escalating towards something that, an outburst or a breakdown or just a real moment of conflict. And we can't do that self-reflection and mindfulness, that space. We don't have that space unless we set good boundaries. So we have really solid boundaries around when we're working, when we're not, how much energy we put out into the world and how much we get back. And having clarity about what those boundaries are. And one of the most important ones when we're talking about work is when you stop working, and ensuring that when you stop working, you're actually done. I just took a 3-week vacation. I did not work. Not everybody's going to get 3 weeks off in the middle of the summer. I recognize that. We have a generous leave policy that I crafted, but like, if you're off, you need to be off, because otherwise you're not getting the benefit of being away from your desk and being away from your work. And so boundaries, self-compassion, self-care, those are the things. At a structural level, mental well-being means being in community, having a job that is and a work environment that's affirming, and that can be hard, and it can be especially hard for people of marginalized identities, and people who are minorities in their companies and studios. And one of the ways to push back against that is to find networks, affinity groups, and organizations that will provide you with community in games, but not necessarily in your company, because you're going to need that. You're going to really need that, because it can be a very lonely process. And also recognizing that if you're in a work environment that is super exploitative and super toxic, that you need to leave if you can, and finding ways to push back against this. And there are ways that people have done this, tried to improve working conditions collectively.
Yeah.
There's the dirty 5-letter word of union, but that, like, those kind of collective actions are one of the ways in which people have kind of tried to create better spaces for themselves. And a lot of people have, left toxic work environments and gone on and said, I learned a bunch of lessons. I'm going to go create something better on my own. I'm going to create a new studio. I'm going to really think about work. Yeah. And like, there's a lot of people who do that, and they learn a lot of lessons that they apply really well in their new work environment. And that's cool and exciting to see. And I get really jazzed when I see people kind of being like, you know what, I think I can do this in a more healthy way or in a better way. And I love it.
Yeah. There's so many studios that are emerging, and it's always X, Riot, X, Bungie, X, Call of Duty. But a lot of them are focused around, hey, we're going to do things a little bit differently than we did at this big studio. And here's what we learned from working at a big place, and here's how we're going to iterate. So I love
it. Yeah. And it's really cool to see. And I have watched this firsthand because my husband runs a studio that's now part of Netflix, but they've really focused for a long, long time on sustainability and well-being. And good boundaries. So I like to see it. So
You're in the games world.
yeah.
Truly.
Yes. Yeah, truly.
What advice would you give to somebody that wants to be an ally in games and the mental health conversation? You said talk about forwarding people to communities. That seems huge.
Yeah. Yeah. So allyship is so don't try to be a savior or a hero. One, because most people don't need that. They need support and affirmation and validation.
Yeah.
And two, because if you're going to be the hero and save everybody, you're not going to save yourself. You're not going to be good. It's not going to be good for you. So the you can't fix people, but you can affirm that what they're experiencing is valid and real, and you can help them navigate how to find the right resources. And you can, especially if you are a person with privilege or power, you can demonstrate that with your attention and your validation, that these kinds of things are normal, okay, and not to be shamed.
Yeah.
And that's really important. Like if somebody in my team has a mental health challenge or experience, the first thing that I do is say, what do you need to be okay? And how can I help you? And then I communicate those boundaries and needs to the rest of the team. And that is just me being really clear that this, something is needed. This is a normal thing, just like any other accommodation, like somebody needs to go on maternity leave or somebody needs FMLA, right? It's like, this is a normal thing. We are going to treat it like everything else. And we're going to get with this person what they need. And that's really straightforward. It's nothing to feel weird about. It's like, really remember that mental health is just like physical health. It's a little bit, we don't understand it as well, but it is as important and as real and as common as any kind of physical challenges. Yeah.
This reminds me, I had a candidate a while ago, and they shared that they were neurodivergent and needed some special accommodations during the interview. And I was so impressed and just shared the feedback that I love to know ahead of time. And it's so, so helpful, obviously, if you're comfortable sharing, but then it brings everything out in the open and everybody can and will definitely accommodate you. But if they don't know, then.
Yeah. I mean, the truth is that most of the time they will accommodate you, and that there's a lot of awareness, especially about neurodivergency in games. However, sometimes you won't be accommodated. And that is a good sign, especially in a job search process, that maybe that's not the place for you.
Yes. Absolutely.
Like there are ways to figure this out really, really initially. But also, if you need accommodations or if you are experiencing a challenge, sometimes it can be hard to know what you need. Right. And so if you're listening to this and you're a manager or a leader, one of the things that you can do is really learn and practice how to facilitate people identifying what they need. If they're in crisis or if they're not okay or if they're experiencing a struggle, is to have a series of conversations or a series of questions that you can ask that help people articulate and play out what is it that they need, what are the struggles they're having, and what do those look like, because we don't always know in the moment exactly what we need.
Yeah, that's really true.
Yeah.
If you are neurodivergent, it might be even more challenging.
Yeah. And I'm not neurodivergent and I don't always know what I need. That's it's like,
yeah, you just need to talk it through. And
sometimes you do.
Yeah. Why? I feel like the advice applies for many different people.
It does. Yeah.
Thank you. I've learned so much talking to you. I have one last question. And before I ask it, I want to point people to your website at takethis.org. Let's pretend we're at an awards ceremony, and I know you've won a few awards lately, so congrats. But you're being, awarded for a lifetime achievement for everything you've done up until this point. Who are the colleagues, friends, mentors, peers who have made the biggest impact on your personal or professional career?
Oh, this is particularly meaningful to me right now. So my team is extraordinary. And I encourage you to go to takethis.org and look up our team, because that crew has taught me so much and is so committed to this work and to the making sure that we do it in the right way. I learn from them every day. And I have, so Take This has, over the last few years, worked very closely with Feminist Frequency, which is run by Anita Sarkeesian. And Feminist Frequency is closing its doors. They've announced recently that they're shutting down. Anita is taking a much needed break from this work and addressing her own burnout from being the target of harassment and toxicity in games for well over 10 years. And Jay and her colleague, so Anita and her colleague Jay at Feminist Frequency have been extraordinary teachers of mine and partners. And so I thank them for the growth that they've given to me and for the opportunity to learn and try to work in this space in a really authentic and productive way. And then I would thank so many other people who have championed our work in big and small ways across the industry, who have taken the risk to invite us into their studios and work with them and to try to learn from us, because we change the way things are by doing, and we change the way things are by asking the hard questions and taking leaps of faith. And so everyone who has taken a leap of faith in this work with us is really extraordinary. And then, of course, nonprofits can't do this work without financial support. And we've had some really important funders along the way. The most recent and most significant is Riot Games. They've been really important to our ability to do this work in the way that we've wanted to. We've also gotten important support from Xbox and from Ubisoft and NEA, and those gifts are things that really do move the needle and enable us to affect more change over time. So I'm really grateful to them as well, and my family. I've got an awesome. You can't do this kind of work that's passionate, that takes the emotional energy that it does, without a supportive partner. So my husband, David, and to know that he's got my back in this work and in this industry, because he's also in the industry, is really important. So those are the people I would thank.
I love it. Thank you. We've been talking to Eve Crevoshay, who's the executive director of Take This. Eve, where can people go to learn more about you?
So go to takethis.org. That's the best place. I have absented myself from the site, formerly known as Twitter. So I'm mostly on LinkedIn these days. I'm exploring Blue Sky, but only with a toe dip. So yeah, I'm mostly on LinkedIn and you can find us on the website. And on our website, we have a bunch of our old talks and press archived. So that's another good way to hear from me and hear from the rest of the team and their wise voices as well. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Thanks so much for listening to the show this week. To catch all the latest from Here's Waldo, you can follow us on LinkedIn. Be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes. We'll see you next time.